Okay, Brian, pull out your phone.
Oh, I don't have my phone. Hold on.
This is Brian Gordon, our audio engineer and podcast editor.
Okay.
Pull out your phone and tell me the last thing you used Google to search for.
Okay, hold on. Soul Night at the Elbow Room.
Soul Night at the Elbow Room. What is that?
It's a dance night. It's going to be the last one because that place is closing.
Do you go dancing a lot?
Sometimes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
It's cool, man. This is just like this curious question I've been having lately, because I work on search every day. I think about search a lot. And I've been wondering about how people use search to fulfill their needs, like the information that we need to get through the day. Okay, dear listener, just for a second, do me a favor. Stop what you're doing and ask yourself, what was the last thing that you searched for?
Actually, let me check my phone.
I searched for a former colleague to try to figure out where she is now because she tried to friend me on Facebook, and I'm like, wait, what's her deal? I don't even know what happened to her.
I love to decorate my home, and I was looking for ideas on how to decorate my mantle.
In Game of Thrones, who killed Jon Snow?
The search that I did was a Korean food recipe. There was like tteokbokki bibimbap, that's a Korean word.
I often look up words that I don't know, but because I Google them, I still don't know how to say them. So I can't pronounce them.
The last thing I searched for was the weather for today because I wasn't sure if I should bike or I should wear my poncho or cape or not. Turns out I didn't because it says sunny.
Searching for information is so commonplace. Sometimes it feels like breathing. And not to be dramatic about it, but we sort of do it without really thinking about it.
I have no idea. I don't remember. I do so many queries on Google that I have absolutely no idea what my most recent one was. That's a really funny question.
Actually, this is great because this is kind of a research question that I would ask someone, and it's a lot more challenging than I realized.
My daughter constantly searches for dogs. She spends a lot of time on Google Images just looking at different breeds. My wife uses Google as kind of a spell checker for words you might not easily find in the dictionary, words like hobbitses or schnauzberries. And while writing this intro, I was really curious about my own search history. The last thing I searched for was Joel Schumacher's filmography. Before that, who invented the panopticon? It's Jeremy Bentham. Our individual search histories are profoundly personal. These queries map to the way that we understand the world, how we verbalize our interests. They tell the story of the things that we wonder about, the things that we want, and the things that we need. Welcome to the Google Method, the podcast where we explore the design stories behind Google products and experiences. I'm your host, Travis Neilson, and in this episode, we're going to be hearing from Scott Wasson and Peter Jin Hung, who work on Google's Job Search product, which is a product that helps people who are looking for employment find and connect to those employers.
It's interesting because jobs are not something people typically look for on search.
This is Scott, UX lead for Job Search.
Just most likely because it's new. It's a new sort of vertical of content. So there's no built-in expectation of search to have things. But people actually, a majority of people do start their job search process on Google, which is probably true for all categories of information. But surprisingly, even though they don't expect Google to have jobs, they start their job search on Google. And so it's a great opportunity to bring jobs to job seekers earlier without having them need to go to several different platforms and look for jobs at each one of them.
What does it mean now that search has started indexing jobs?
Well, in the context of job search, I think it's one of the most fundamental questions that we have that defines our humanity, which is, who are you? What do you do? And what are you going to do about it?
This is Peter, UX strategy lead for social good, empathy, and human-centered innovation.
And so I think job search is more than looking for the next paycheck. It's helping you survive. It's helping you stand tall. So I think the problems that arise, the questions that arise, and the insights that arise from digging into that could be really profound on how we humanize search.
Scott, what does it mean to you to work on search?
It means so many things. From the outside, I really felt like it was an opportunity to have a large impact on a lot of users. And especially when it comes to jobs, that's hugely important. But on search, we've had this amazing opportunity to have billions of people search for jobs through Google and be helped by Google. So
you find personal meaning in just the scale of it? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, scale and impact. And then obviously like the outcome, which is something we're tuning now with Peter's help and others.
Yeah. Peter, just thinking about the bigger picture, in your opinion, how do you see that the product of search has impacted the world?
That's a great question.
That's why I scoped it to your opinion. This is not a definitive data-backed answer. I just want to, like, what is your sentiment that you draw into this?
We have a canvas of hundreds of thousands to millions, and you affect people's relationship with themselves and the world through these artifacts and projections. And my background as a biologist was really understanding how we connect to things and how we interact with things. And so the thing that mattered to me was something deeper. There's something called transactive memory. And when I lose a sock or I lose my phone, like I ask the person who's closest to me, it's like, hey, do you know where I put it? And in relationships, if you break up with that person, turns out if you map where that question is, where's my phone or where's my sock, to your brain, it'll map to that individual, and then it'll show physical trauma in the brain through the breakup because you no longer have that person in your life to represent that memory store. And Google and the way we ask questions is an external memory store, an external way that we are modifying our own brains and that we could traumatize our own brains. And that relationship is shown through transactive memory is a very powerful thing. And then a lot of the other neuroscience and behavioral science stuff that I've been really focusing on, because the fact that we're human beings, show that it's much finer tuned, this relationship that we have with information and with ourselves, and that information is not nascent and neutral, like it affects our perceptions. And do we have a responsibility to what that information does to our perception and our relationships to ourselves? Does it increase stress? Does it help us be more resilient? Being informed doesn't necessarily also discuss how well you can handle that information, how well you can act on that information. How resilient are you? How capable are you? And so these are the sorts of questions that I'd love to see part of the dialogue moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, these are certainly large perspectives. Thanks for bringing that, Peter. I'm wondering if either of you can talk about the work you do day to day and how it adds up to be contributive to that bigger story.
I mean, that's something we're working on, which is a very emotional journey, as you pointed out, and a very difficult one, and it, really affects every aspect of your life. But I think that we, as a company right now, are pretty focused on trust, and I think that's a big aspect in job search as well, that we want users to be able to trust the jobs that we're showing them, especially now that we're getting into recommendations and the sort of effects that can have on people's psyche. If you recommend something too junior for them, they sort of get offended. If you recommend things that are too senior, you're sort of setting them up for failure. So there's this real balancing act you have to play with recommendations and how you explain the reason they're seeing these things to them. That can have a big emotional effect as well, and in a positive way a lot of times if you do it well. So I think just little things around making sure that we have a place for them to find and be incited to explore but feel safe are things that we're trying to work on every day.
I think search has always been, at Google at least, about a perspective of democratization, and job search has done a really good job at aggregating very diverse and disparate sources of information, and that's very powerful. And I think in that course of democratization, and what empathy and behavioral sciences can do is also look at, once you have access to the information, how can you really and truly empower an individual? Because we have maybe access to the information doesn't mean we have the same awareness of how to use that information. And I think that is something that empathy can guide us on in terms of understanding people's place. The stresses of losing their job, of working multiple jobs, turns out stress actually incapacitates your ability to really think rationally through a lot of decisions that are necessary. So again, I think job search has started where I think all of search needs to do, which is democratize information. But then the next step is, how do we humanize it so that we're truly equal?
Can you tell me what goes into understanding what the journey is like for that possible user? And how did you reflect that in the things that you build?
That's really hard to do, it turns out. More so in the job space than probably most other sort of content verticals. There's qualitative information you can take in from user studies and lots of task completion types of evaluative research as well, and taking input from feedback that we get just from general users, as well as running experiments and looking at logs and funnels. So we've actually built a search growth funnel for jobs as well. I think Peter did this work with Method, not the podcast, but the agency, and used D-Scout, which is sort of a more intimate way of doing qualitative research.
D-Scout?
D-Scout, yeah. It's D-S-C-O-U-T. And it's sort of like a diary study, but the type of technology and the format that they use is even a little bit more personal than a lot of the previous versions of diary studies that I've seen before. And so it really lets you track along with users and their day-to-day habits and how they're feeling about things as they interact with the product or don't interact with the product. They're just even thinking about that domain or that space. And that's unlocked for us a lot of this more emotional feedback, which we've never been able to gather before, or at least not in any like large scale way.
I heard you say the word catastrophic question. Is this involved with that?
Yeah, Scott's mentioned a few things around qualitative research and how we go about doing that. And you asked a question about what our journey is for the user. And I think there's an authentic commitment at Google always to like understand what that journey is and how do we get closer. And I've seen years of Scott's research and prototypes, so like I can attest to that. I'm standing on the shoulders of some really great intent. And the catastrophic question is used in ethnography and good journalism as a way of really digging into the reality, especially when people are guarded or people may delude themselves. And in the area of job search, everyone is so concerned and panicked about being the best representation of themselves. It's hard to get an honest view. And one of the surprises we found out through the research and through this extended diary study, because the diary study allowed people to report back in their own bedrooms, in their own living room, in the parking lot after they failed that interview. So we had highly intimate accounts of where people were in their lives.
Can I just paint a little clearer picture of what a diary study is?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. So as I understand it, and then you can correct me, as I understand it, people are kind of like doing a little bit of a selfie video.
Yeah.
And they're saying, this is what my day was like.
Yeah.
And then they give those videos, every day they make an entry and then they give them to Google.
Yeah.
And we watch them and say, okay, this is what it's like for you going through this thing.
Yeah. And so essentially any study that we do, our pursuit is truth and our pursuit is the reality that people have. And a good qualitative study tries to get at that center. And it's always hard with any study, especially if you're there observing, or especially if a study or interview is very short, because, again, people put on their best selves. They're in a different or foreign environment. So some of the best studies are if you could ride alongside them, if you could be there with them. And this particular format of study really allowed people to present their actions at very key critical times that we needed to understand, and for them to allow us in and share that information. And I think that was really humbling because the journey is so stressful for job seekers. The line of catastrophic questioning is a format to get at what is the worst case scenario and allow people to go past their guards and actually role play and perhaps even remember how bad it can be for them, and then divulge the truth that we need to hear. Good journalism and ethnography approaches that technique, but the entire thing was really trying to understand their lives more in depth. And I think what happened, to Scott's point, was we had a lens that we never had before. A lot of self-reporting in previous interviews is like, oh, yeah, I'm doing all right, even a positive attitude. And what we found after tracking them for several weeks is just the learned hopelessness and the desperation and the depression and the stress and the anxiety and how they struggle to manage. And again, these are the sorts of conditions that for me also, from a behavioral science and neuroscience perspective, says there's a lot going on in the brain that's preventing them from being their optimal selves. can they even make the right series of decisions given the right information, or the information that we seem to say, hey, if you search, here's our democratized set of information. We've aggregated, very like meta search, and it's very functional. It's fantastic. So I think good qualitative research is helping a lot of the great quantitative research we have here at Google. So it's also referred to thick data. Qualitative research allows this thickness in really understanding the depth of what people are going through to combine with all the big data analysis that we have at Google.
I like that term, thick data. That's really something. Can you give us an example of a thick data point that really informed how we executed on the product of job search?
Well, I think I can give one through a shout out of something that the team just launched.
Yeah.
Jobs for Veterans. You literally type in jobs for veterans into the box, and you get the search experience that allows you to type in your military codes. And those codes basically do a mapping of what skills you had in the military and how they might translate to civilian jobs.
Wow.
And that's fantastic because that's almost like a Rosetta Stone, if you will, like a translation of like the skills you have mapped to these things. You may not have known that you qualify for all these sorts of jobs, but you do because they're validated for the types of skills that are required for those jobs. And for me, that is an exercise in empathy, and the sort of empathy that I think we can do more of at Google. And Scott and I were just out in the hallway talking about it because I'm so excited for this launch because it was so well received. And during this time that we need to support a political climate, we need to support our fellow citizens and our fellow veterans and understand the hardship they go through. For the sacrifices they've made, they come back and not be able to find a job. Meanwhile, they actually have the skills to do jobs. They just don't know what jobs they're qualified for. Well, it turns out most people in life have a similar challenge. Life is a battle. And where's the battle-scarred life warrior code that an average person can put into Google to say, I am a, jobs for life veterans, saying I am battle-scarred, I have all these skills. And it's the thing we've heard in many surveys. It's just that people want jobs and they have skills, but they don't know what skills go with what jobs. And if there was some kind of mapping that we could do for people's life experiences, a way to validate them other than just the accreditation that someone has to go through university or college or vocational school, where there's a lot of risk, a lot of financial commitment that some people can't afford. How can we validate people's skills? And a great example of that actually is work-to-release programs from prisons. Turns out there's a higher rate of employment of ex-convicts from work-to-release programs because the work-to-release programs basically demonstrate to a future employer that they can reduce their risk. They see the person having done the job, having been mentored, been doing the job itself and having the skills. And so it's not about working with an unknown. Employers see that it's an unknown factor. This person can do the job. I can see that they can do it. So work-to-release programs, in a way, validate someone's actual skills. And so I feel like we need more of that in life. And I'd love to see some way that the entire industry and society can gather together and say, how do we help people validate their skills? How do we make these available? Then how do we help organize that information and make them available to use?
That's fascinating. Everybody kind of has like this skill profile. And we have this opportunity. We have this large data set to just do this matching. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and another big rise in skills are jobs that require soft skills. So a lot of jobs in healthcare. These are jobs that actually machines and AI won't replace anytime soon, right? So the soft skills are also ones that we need to validate, like your ability for compassion, your ability to listen, your ability to navigate a situation of high conflict. And we need to be able to validate them and allow people to say, hey, you'd be great for X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D jobs because they actually require all those soft skills.
Yeah, skills it's been like a hot topic in the job space for the last 5 years. And it's really nothing that anyone's been able to do well yet. I would attribute that mostly to the fact that it's actually really near impossible for people to describe their skills that they have, especially in an accurate and useful way to an employer.
Yeah, unless you have the vocabulary around it, it's hard to talk about. I was talking to a colleague of mine and I go, did you know that you're a connector? And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you just have this fascinating ability. I've observed it a few times where you're able to understand what somebody does and the value that they bring, and then immediately direct them to somebody who will complement that. And he goes, oh yeah, I never really thought about it that way, but I absolutely agree. Like, and unless like I gave him that moment to kind of think about the vocabulary and self-assign, he would have never been able to speak about that skill or maybe even foster it over time. Scott, job search is in this moment where we just launched veteran job search. I'm really curious about your journey as the UX designer on this product. What was the 1.0 launch like? Where did it start?
Well, we actually were pretty robust with the features that we launched with, just because job search is such a known thing. There's sort of like, people use the word table stakes, or the phrase, that we needed to have a certain base level of features to even start. And so we started with jobs and job detail pages, a list view, the ability to save, and the ability to sign up for notifications, which is also hugely important for job seekers to sort of stay ahead of the curve and to, obviously have the job search be proactive for them. So saves we actually launched after the initial launch. So that was like a 1.1. But notifications was something we felt was core to our ability to both give, users a way to feel safe about not needing to come back all the time to check on jobs.
Looking forward and kind of just looking at the space in general, what are you most excited about?
I'm really most excited about helping users have better vision into the hiring process once they've applied. So I wouldn't incorporate the actual application process with that as well. But like I was saying earlier, the biggest challenges for job seekers for frustration, other than like the actual process of applying and being denied and things like that, are applying to jobs, knowing that they're qualified for a job, and then not having any sort of view into, did they see my resume or application?
Like a read receipt for an application?
Yeah. Dude. Or, have I already been put off the list? Am I no longer up for the running? How did my interview go? Am I, still in the running after that interview? Like all of those little micro steps in the process of being a candidate at a company or having applied to a company. It's a complete black box for job seekers. So I'm sure everybody knows this, I think, from firsthand experience, pretty much. Even some of the most elite tech people who get recruited left and right probably have some experience with this, where you send your resume off and you have no idea. You wait, you wait a couple weeks, you wait a couple more weeks, you wait a couple more weeks.
Yeah, there's a feeling of powerlessness there.
Yeah.
And that black box is actually one of the biggest things that we tried to tackle in the research, and where we try to use a perspective on empathy, because it's the unknowns. And it's actually a great human story, because if we just look at job search and try to look at it as like, oh, these are the particulars and steps that you have to go through, versus looking at it as like, this is one of the fundamental human questions of self-worth. Because quite often, especially in our society and our history, what you do kind of defines you and sets up your relationship to self and self-worth to the world. And so if we were to map it and reframe it simply as like, hey, it's like a really bad dating scene, like to put yourself out there to court someone and then to have them reject you over and over again, all these people just rejecting you, when you put your honest self out there and then you do everything to make yourself look good and then be rejected, your sense of self-worth, your idea of agency, these crumble. And these are like aspects of fundamental sense of identity and how you function in society. And you damage that, you damage a person's ability to go through society. And a lot of these things of not knowing, a person not responding to you, that's almost the sort of sociopathic behavior that we would see in real life. Like that wouldn't be acceptable if someone did that to you in real life. And yet we kind of experience that with job search. We don't get responses, or the rejections that we do get are dehumanizing. And so if we look at it as bad relationships, all of a sudden I think we can humanize it more as like, oh wow, we really need to pay attention to that. And so Dan Ariely in the initial investigation had done work around just the emotional drain that it is, and that how people struggle with that. And so it's definitely an opportunity. And Achint leads the engineering team. His brother, although very educated, also was struggling when he was first looking for a job here. And Chin saw firsthand how his brother was struggling. And similarly, a lot of the directors and VPs also had similar stories. So when job search was in its nascent possibility, everyone was saying don't do it because they knew how loaded it was. It's not a simple matter of putting information out there. Like the struggle to get jobs doesn't just solely rely on having a resume. There's so many other factors, and we may not be versed enough in handling all the emotional challenges that go along with it. But to Chint and Nick Zacharesk, they brought forth, again, the first step, which was democratizing information, and also being conscientious that they want to create a base so that they can build on top of that these things that help the deeper humanity of job search. For example, the way Nick did it was also looking at moving the market forward in transparency. And Nick was highly aware of things like salary transparency and how that's become law in California and how that could move across the states. And so that was in post-launch, soon after this real commitment to say, hey, do we also have, as one of the filters, ability to see salaries with the job that you're applying for? And it empowers you. And so, again, we need to start with this baseline of democratization, but I think the intent of the team is to address the humanity and to address the civic equality of what it can be. And so I've seen that baseline, and I'm excited about what else can happen as we apply more empathy and behavioral science and humanity to it.
I can do a quick Google search and see how tall Kobe Bryant is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can figure out who won the game last week or when the next full moon is going to be. And those are really quick answers.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is this experience that you guys are building where we're investing in what you called a transactional memory, right? It's a relationship where we're depending on kind of each other. Like job search depends on the experience of these people.
Mm-hmm.
These people are building a relationship with job search also. This is really, really interesting.
Yeah, and what I loved about how we start to demonstrate how we're humanizing Google on many levels. I mean, we have the Google Doodles, Ryan Germick, who runs that team, and personality about what it means to be human through that expression. But also that commercial Paris love, just typing in, going to Paris, falling in love, learning to speak French, having a baby. These are great human stories, and Google is a fantastic tool to assist our humanity. And I think we've done a lot with democratizing information, like I've been saying before. But I do think what that commercial does is show what happens when we are empowered. So it's important to illuminate and empower and then assist. And I think that's what job search is doing. We're moving past this sort of, here's a bit of fact. And instead, it's like, here is a way to navigate the world. And it's not enough to tell you that this job listing is there. What are the skills that you need just to make it through an interview? What expectations should you set? Turns out most resumes, when submitted, they're not even reviewed by a human being. It goes through an applicant tracking system. And so you have machines going against what people are submitting. So ideally, you should have a machine going against a machine and really save your humanity for that interview on how you connect with another individual. But most people who submit a resume don't know that their resume is going to be automatically perhaps shut down through an applicant tracking system that doesn't match up the same keywords that they had hoped for. But if you know that, then all of a sudden you don't stay in that sort of black hole of helplessness. And you're like, oh, that's what happened. Or 95% of the time, your resume is going to get rejected. So keep applying. And a lot of people waste so much on that single resume. So again, if you had the benefit of mentors in the space, they might tell you that, or people who've been there before. And again, I think when we share information, it's like it's not enough to just help you submit your resume, but set expectations on what's going to happen to that resume, help you with the life skills to optimize your ability to stay focused, stay resilient, go further. Beyond illuminating with information, empower and assist are, I think, really amazing opportunities for our future with Google.
Wow.
It's interesting, too, I think that, like, right now there seems to be happening across technology, this sort of awakening of the emotional and psychological effects that all of our work has on people, right? Some of it's been highlighted in sort of negative or reactionary ways around, news consumption and information consumption and or political views and things like that. But there seems to be almost like this second layer of what our responsibility is as a good actor in this world in technology that is sort of now being emphasized. And maybe job search, just because it's a very emotional experience, is like at the tip of that iceberg in some way, sort of surfacing this issue across tech.
Yeah, and it's a prime candidate for layering more emotional intelligence. And I'm also, like Scott said, very grateful that we're at a time, both, I think, because of circumstance through politics, but through just awakening and social responsibility and civic duty, that like, hey, we could do more. And we're great with the technology and with the IQ. What can we do with the EQ?
I'm listening to you guys talk deeply about this product that you guys work with day in and day out, and the deep knowledge that you have about how people approach the problem space and also your contribution to that problem space, your product. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is really good radio. Because we're on, like, this is really good. Like, this is good information. People need to understand that these things are understood, right?
Yeah.
They need to understand that people are looking at these problems. And then I'm thinking, oh, well, also this is a design podcast. How are we going to talk about pixels? And then I'm catching myself and I'm saying, like, wait a second. This is what design is about,
Behind
right?
the pixel.
This is, right? Like, we're going to make something that really speaks to what it's like to be a human and having that experience. I'm just like really excited that this conversation has gone this way. And when I was trying to create an outline for this discussion, I knew it was going to be a little bit of a heavier one, a little bit of a thicker discussion, and I didn't know how to land the plane. And so I decided, why don't we play a game?
Okay.
It's not a silly game. It's just a Mad Lib game. I'm going to give you a Mad Lib, and if you're compelled, just finish the sentence, however you like. Okay. So the reason I chose to work on this project is...
This might not fit in the underline, but to be honest, I didn't choose this project. It chose me.
Ooh, is that like
Destiny? No, I don't mean it in that sort of.
There's a metaphysical component to it.
Yeah, not so existential, but I just meant that I was hired and then I was given this project. I actually was not that interested to start off, but then I realized what an important moment this is in most people's lives, that it's an amazing challenge to work on.
The reason I wanted to work on job search was helping humanity. And that sounds goofy, I know, but like, Travis, you know me, and that's actually been the way I almost fill all my Mad Libs for working on things, working on social good and working with .org and working with you on crisis response. But for me, when I say helping humanity, it's got an asterisk on it because I feel like we have such great passion for all the technology that we're enabling, and the technology needs to really be balanced with more understanding of humanity. Because that's how we can truly help humanity, if we know what makes us tick, what makes us scared, what makes us inspired, what makes us push ourselves. And job search is that, because job search is about one of the scariest things in your life, and about having agency and dignity and ability to stand tall and feed your family. And these are big things that, you know, when you just hear job search, you don't realize it means all those other things, but it does mean those things.
Yeah. I want to thank you guys for showing up to talk about this topic and to really do the deep work that you do. This is really, really something.
And again, I want to give one more shout out to Scott and the team, Matt, Irene, Joy, Dave, and Nick and Achint. Like, they've started something amazing here.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay, so this is the last episode of the year, and I think it might be a good time for me to express publicly how great it is to work on this podcast with this talented crew. This episode is edited and recorded by Brian Gordon and produced by Barbara Eldridge. The artwork you see for each episode is created by Skip Hirsch. After each episode is released, I find it helpful to send an email to the team and recap what I learned and what that experience meant to me personally. I include the guests on the emails because they're a big part of this too. They don't just come and sit here and answer my questions. We usually meet a few times and we talk about how to find a way to make this story touch on the things that are important to them. I think it's important for individuals to feel expressed, and we try to get to that place each time, and it's not always immediately clear how. So I'd also like to thank the guests that we've worked with this year. The team here at the Google Method Podcast is always looking for interesting ideas to cover, so if you have an interesting idea for an episode, find a link in the show notes to a form to fill out. I'm sure you've thought of things that have never occurred to us, so we'd love to hear your ideas. That form and more information on the things that we've talked about in this episode are on the show notes at design.google/podcasts. All right, from all of us at the Google Method, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next year.